It's good to have you join us on another episode of Africa Updates, reaching you from Trust TV in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And this week on the program, we're discussing something very quite important happening on the continent. So stay with us. We'll be right back. As I said before that break, it's going to be quite a very important conversation that we're tackling this week on the program. I'm your host, Chiamaka Mwafo. Now, the topic is democracy failing in Africa? We can see what's happening across the continent. We see that elections are still held. However, are they truly free, fair, and meaningful? Military coups are on the rise. Public trust in institutions is eroding, and economic hardship is pushing citizens to question the very value of democracy. From different parts of the continent, we see this happening at the Sahel states, the junta taking place in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. We see what's happening in Kenya. They're asking for dividends of democracy and all that. Now, joining me to further discuss and give insights on this conversation is the Director, Africa and West Asia, International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, for short, International IDEA. Thank you so much, Dr. Roba Sharamo, for joining us today on the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, now Dr. Roba Sharamo is currently joining us from Kenya, where he's busy doing some work. Now, as someone who works and deals with elections, can you actually tell us that topic, that question, is democracy failing in Africa?
Thank you very much. To begin with, let me say that. Hello?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So to begin with, let me say that democracy is not failing, but democracy is challenged in Africa. Okay. If you look at the continent, you know, we continue to have regular elections. We continue to do some good political transitions in certain regions of the continent. We see that particularly the Southern Africa, if I look at the recent election in South Africa, the recent election in Botswana, the recent election in Mauritius, the recent election as well in Namibia, which actually produced the second popularly elected female president in Africa. I will say that the democracy is challenged, but that some regions are doing very well. But then if you look at countries, maybe even in Kenya, where the youths, the Gen Zs are searching for reform, whether you look at the Sahel, where we have quite a number of military coups and popular support for uprising. If you look at the Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and many countries in Western Africa, there's quite some challenge in that. But if you look at as well, the voter turnout across the continent is kind of declining, right? So there's an element of lack of political trust in quality of elections that happen across the continent. We also continue to experience, elections which are contested, but some judicial institutions like in Kenya, Malawi, they were able to really, overturn some presidential election, and those institutions, really exercise their rights. But overall, if you look at the last Afrobarometer survey, 70% of African youth, which is close to 60% of the African population, actually wants to live in democracies. So the democratic aspiration is still there. The youth wants to live in a democratic society. So I will say democracy is being challenged because in some places, the element of peace dividend is not there. The elements of democratic dividend is not there. The youth are not getting jobs. There's a state of hopelessness. Then we also have situations where electoral results are really not, and doesn't really speak to what the voters' aspirations are. The cases of electoral manipulation, as you have seen in Mozambique and many of other countries across Africa, I would say democracy is challenged, but is not failing totally.
Okay. Now, that's a very good take you've given us. But let's come back to some of these countries that went with the coup. And you see the people actually coming to the streets and they're rejoicing and saying, we would rather have these guys in power than democracy. In some of those countries, a democratic rule became a monarchical rule. What, for those like the Sahel states, what can we say actually engineered them to come to the place whereby they would prefer a military coup to a democratic rule?
Let me specifically speak to the dynamics we see in the Sahel, which is also some of the experiences we continue to see in, in, in parts of the Horn of Africa. I will say that in some of those countries, the ruling elites totally failed. There's a total disconnect between the population and the ruling elites. Extreme levels of, let's say, corruption in some of those countries, where the executive, not only in some of those countries, but where some presidents have really overstayed. Let me put it that way. We have across the continent where some presidents have been in power for 40 years. We have across the continent in some places where some families have been ruling, for close to 58 years, 55 years. So when the elites become extremely corrupt, where there's a total disconnect between the youth, who really actually are yearning for a better governance, yearning for opportunities, yearning for better livelihoods. When this is not met, particularly due to corruption, official corruption, I would say, in some of the countries, then that disconnect now pushes the youth to the street to demand change. And I think it's also within their democratic rights and the rights of the populace, because the sovereign power actually lies with the people. So in some of those countries, I would say is really bad governance, the deficit of governance, lack of proper social contract, when elites are totally impervious to the needs of the society, and that's what ends up resulting in that. So when you now welcome the military leaders who also promise, to really deal with corruption, drive some of the, I would say, resilient dictators from power who cannot easily be removed through the ballot, then that creates an opportunity for some sort of regime change. And I think what we are seeing now in the Sahel is really a play out of that.
Okay. All right now. So this sentiment, especially among the youth, would we call it democratic fatigue, or is this some democratic evolution? Doctor?
Hello?
This, what we're seeing in Africa, in some parts of Africa, be it here in the West.
Hello? I am.
Can you hear? Can you hear us?
I kind of. I lost you a bit. I lost you a bit.
Okay,
I didn't get the question.
so I'll take it again. I'm saying these experiences that we're having, is it from a place of democratic fatigue, tiredness, or will we say that an evolution, a democratic evolution is taking place?
Could you repeat again, please?
Would we say that we're experiencing a democratic fatigue in the countries where these issues are happening, or even in the African continent as a whole, or are we experiencing some sort of evolution in democratic sense?
I would say it's some sort of, because I think for us to conclusively say that we are having some sort of evolution, we actually need to see how some of the military takeovers in Africa are going to perform in delivering better governance for the people. They might be very popular now, but we want to see, are they going to be popular in the next 5 years, 10 years? Are they going to meet the social contract? So I will say what we are experiencing are elements of democratic growth, elements of democratic renewal, I will say, or democratic assertion by the society. But to say that it's an evolution, I think we will wait to see how those leaders are going to respond, how those leaders are going to address the grievances which brought them to power.
Okay. Now, your organization had just a conference last month from June 19 to 22nd of June, and it was called the Pretoria Consensus. And you people were asking
Mm.
a question about the, realigning democratic rules. Could you tell us about that?
Well, the conference it was a very important one. International Idea, as you might know, it's an intergovernmental organization set up in 1995 by about 14 countries. Now we have about 35 member states across the world. Out of Africa, we have 8 countries who are part of International Idea. Countries like South Africa, Mauritius, Mali. So I'm sorry, Mauritius, Namibia, Botswana in the southern part, Ghana, Benin, Cape Verde, as well as Tunis in the north. So we are celebrating 30 years of International Idea. The conference in Pretoria came after our global celebration, where we were looking at the, 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 the state of things, the state of democracy worldwide, which of course, is on the decline in even established democracies like the US and others. So the conference in South Africa brought together about 200 participants across Africa, including senior government officials previously who have served in positions. We hosted it together with South African government, which is one of our member states. And then it brought together the civil society, the academia, the youth, activists, women, and people in the different spheres of the society. So what the conference came up with, the theme is about reimagining democracy in Africa. The point of departure is it looks like democratic decline that we are seeing is a global phenomena. But in Africa, it continues to have its own unique experiences. We also try to compare with other countries in the global south. We had participants from Nepal, Pakistan, and many other countries, Mexico and others, to share what are some of the experiences that countries in the global south, in the Asia Pacific, in the Latin America have actually gone through, and the ones in Africa, and what can the different states or countries learn, or the continents learn from each other. In that, what came out is that democracy is on trial, the democracy is on decline, the quality of elections is not to the level that we would like to have. What we need is really reimagining democracy that actually is contemporary, in the sense that it addresses the societal needs, aspirations, particularly of the youth in Africa, which tends to be the majority. So we are looking at democracy must deliver. Where the democracy doesn't deliver, then we are having revolutions. We may be having armed conflicts and violence, as we are experiencing in countries like Sudan. We have state challenges, like we have seen in the Sahel, part of Horn Africa. So what the conference really looked at is to look at some of the experiences on how democracy needs to be reimagined. How do we bring the social contract back to the center? How do we address the issues of corruption, which is really, I would say, the issues of corruption, which is really eating the soul of the African state, and also enforcement of the rule of law. We also some of the things that came out really is also to look at how do we bring the youth and women into the center of governance in Africa, not just to be included, but to be given powers to make decisions. How can we have political systems? How can we have political parties that are really, with some level of ideology and committed, to driving a societal agenda, rather than become really an extension of the executive. We as well looked at the role of judiciary, because judiciary is also extremely important to put checks on governments. And as well, of course, the role of the civil society is something that came out as being very, very instrumental. So I would say the Pretoria consensus is really looking at some of the areas that really needs, I would say, reform, maybe tweaking, you might call it, but to really reimagine democracy in Africa, where the African continent itself could learn from countries in the global south, could learn from something in global west, including, for example, how they can effectively utilize their mineral wealth, their natural resources to advance economic growth, economic empowerment. We must deal with poverty. We must deal with underdevelopment. We must deal with illiteracy. We must deal with lack of inclusivity. Through that is when we can build an African society that is more integrated. Just to mention maybe one very important thing, if you look at the way European Union operates now, they have, greater appreciation for treaties that they sign at the European Union level, Brussels level. They have trade pacts. They have a foreign policy which is more harmonized. They have free movement of people. But in African continent, we talk about free movement of people. We have talk about African Charter on democracy, governance, and good elections and all that. We have African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which has been signed and is in force. But movement between borders in Africa is very difficult. If the continent is not integrated, if the people cannot move around, where do we then Agenda 2063? So we need to get the African continent that is more open, that trades more with each other, that allows its people to move around.
Okay. All right.
That creates opportunities, including creating an environment for private sector to try.
All right.
Hello?
Okay, all right. So, Doctor, we'll be going on a short break, and then when we return, the conversation continues. Just stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on Africa Update this week. We've been looking at a very critical issue, democracy. The question is it failing in Africa? And our guest, Dr. Roba Sharomo, has told us that democracy isn't failing, it is challenged. Now, back to you, Doctor. Thank you for staying with us on the program. Now, one of the key things I would like to ask from that Pretoria consensus that took place is, what practical steps, I know you started mentioning some of them before we went on the break, I'd like for you to now expound more, can African governments take to transition from procedural to substantive democracy?
Could you kindly repeat that again briefly?
What practical steps can African governments take to transit from procedural to substantive democracy?
Thank you very much. I think the African government must go back to the basics of ensuring economic development. They must get back to creating a people-centered development that people are really involved and that the government actually delivers, that they address the aspirations of the people, as well as really collecting the views of the youth, collecting the views of the civil society, and coming up with an accountable political system. So the element of accountability, political accountability, economic accountability is critical. The African governments must also come up with systems that gives hope, to the youth particularly. A lot of African youths are now very well educated, but the high level of unemployment is really skyrocketing. So the African governments must provide opportunities for its youthful population, economic opportunities. I will say the African government must also be economically accountable and really deal with the chronic corruption that is really widespread across most of the African continent. So the element of accountability, the checks on governments is extremely important. And then we should nurture a political system of elective representation that actually delivers for the people, but doesn't just become another shield or another mechanism of political enrichment by elected leadership. And that's what we are seeing, that the parliaments are basically almost subservient to the ruling elites, and you can't really differentiate between the executive arm of the government and the parliaments in some countries. So the parliament must really speak and protect the voice of the people and protect the constitution. We need to have the independence of institutions, judicial institutions, electoral commissions, which also upholds, the wishes of the people when the voters go to the poll, and elect a leader of their choice. So the element of electoral integrity is extremely important. Not just doing elections for the sake of doing it, for the sake of ticking the box to be able to get IMF loan or World Bank loan, or to comply with someone constitutional provisions or requirements, but rather to have quality elections that really bring change in the lives of the people, and also the governance mechanism. So element of inclusion is extremely important. We need to bring inclusion in the political space, where the youth, where the women could actually, people with good visions could actually come up and be able to lead the constitution, the countries according to the constitution. I will say as well, maybe finally, the African continent, particularly the leadership of African governments, must also support regional institutions like African Union, or the regional economic communities like ECOWAS, IGAD, East African Community, COMESA, SADC, and many others, where continental norms that are signed at the Addis Ababa level are actually implemented by the member states. Otherwise, the African Union as a union will be able to do very little on their own. I will also say, finally, the governments must come up with a transformational approach to politics. The constitution must be very predictable, that elections can be held in a timely manner, but not just election, but really to change the lives of the people, particularly deal with issues of underdevelopment, as said, issues of poverty, issues of illiteracy, and inclusion, and bringing the youth into the center. As well, the civic space for media, space for civil society should continue to be protected. And what is also extremely important is, finally, to create a space for the private sector, because jobs are created by private sector.
Okay.
So governments must come up with a environment that allows business investors, not only from the continent, but even from international sector, international other countries, to be able to really flourish in that regard as well. So, in summary, to get back to the basics of the social contract, social contract between the people who are governed as per the constitution, as well as now ensuring that their aspirations and their wishes and their I would say their own thoughts to be able to live in a better country, aspiration to live in a better country, is actualized. Finally, the rule of law. African countries must adhere to the rule of law, have better physical security, be able to create opportunities for growth, opportunities to do business without being confronted by elements around, for example, violent extremism, or lack of security, that communities will not be able to really go about their daily business. Okay. And finally, I will say the African continent, African leaders must continue to really protect and at the geopolitics level speak for the inclusion of the African continent at the UN Security Council level. The reform within multilateral institutions, reform in the international financial institutions, and also deal with the issue of debts. I would say that is really undermining economic viability of most of the states that we have.
All right, Dr. Sharamo, I see you have quite a lot to say. You kept on saying finally, finally, but you still had so much more to say. And from what you said now, it's very clear that economic has a very vital role to play in democracy as well. And so if the economy is doing so well, if the people are living very well, democracy should flourish in most parts of the African continent. Thank you so much for giving us your insights and takes on the program today on Africa Update.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you also for having us. Have a good evening.
Thank you. That was Dr. Roba Sharamo, the Director for West Africa and West Asia for International IDEA, talking to us about democracy in Africa. Is it failing? Is it working? But he said it's not failing, it's just challenged. And he's told us how we could do, what we could do to help fix it and make it work for us as Africans. I hope you've learned something, gotten educated, gotten informed, and if maybe even gotten inspired to maybe want to contest for something in the future elections. That's it for Africa Update this week. For more of our programs, news, documentaries, do want to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. I've been your host today, Chiamaka Nwafo. Same time, same place next week. Bye for now.